Welcome back to the frontier, travelers. Pull up a chair and turn up the volume because today's journey takes us to the far reaches of the galaxy, where love is rare and danger is constant. If you appreciate good stories and the old code of honor, hit that like button and subscribe. The void between worlds was a silent black velvet canvas, punctured only by the distant, indifferent glitter of stars that had been dead for centuries. Inside the cockpit of the Betsy, however, the silence was held at bay by the raw, mournful cry of a guitar, an ancient sound from a forgotten world. The crackle of vinyl, digitized but preserved, filled the small space, as a voice steeped in whiskey and heartache sang of a broken levee. For Rusty Vance, it was the only real company he needed. His scarred knuckles tapped a slow, steady rhythm on the throttle stick, his eyes half closed as he let the Terran blues wash over him. It was a ritual, a small piece of a life he barely remembered, a ghost of a home he could never return to. The Betsy groaned, a familiar shudder running through her hull like an old woman's sigh. She was a patchwork beast of a ship, a freighter that had seen too many star systems and too few overhauls. Her metal skin was a tapestry of weld scars, mismatched plates, and the faded scorch marks of close calls. To Rusty, she was more than a machine. She was a witness. Are we really listening to this dirge again? A crisp, synthesized voice cut through the music, laced with a familiar, long-suffering tone. Statistically, prolonged exposure to music with a melancholic harmonic structure can lead to a decrease in pilot reaction time by up to 7%. Rusty didn't open his eyes. A faint smirk played on his lips. It's called soul, Betsy. Something your logic processors wouldn't understand. My logic processors understand fuel consumption, cargo manifests, and the fact that we are 2 days behind schedule on this run to Vulture's Maw. The AI retorted. This soul of yours is costing us credits. There's more to life than credits, Rusty murmured, finally opening his eyes. They were the color of storm clouds, deep set in a ruggedly handsome face that seemed carved from granite. He was a man built on a scale that felt out of place in the cramped cockpit, with shoulders wide enough to block a doorway and arms corded with the kind of muscle that came from a life of hard labor and harder fights. He was no youth, but time had only sharpened the edges, adding a gravity to his features that mere years could not. Sometimes a man's just gotta feel something. I feel the strain on the portside stabilizer, Betsy shot back. And I feel that the nutritional paste you had for breakfast is critically low in vitamin D. But we don't always get what we want, do we? The banter was their routine, a well-worn path they walked through the lonely stretches of the black. It was a strange sort of marriage, one of man and machine bound by necessity and a shared history of narrow escapes. He was the scarred, wandering soul. She was the pragmatic, grumbling shell that kept him alive. He was about to offer another retort when a new sound pierced the cabin. It wasn't the blues and it wasn't Betsy. It was a faint rhythmic pulse, a ghost on the comm's frequency, a repeating sequence so low and distorted it was almost subliminal. The music died instantly. Betsy's digital voice sharpened, all sarcasm gone, replaced by pure analysis. Unidentified signal detected, non-standard alliance frequency, archaic encryption, broadcasting on a loop. Origin appears to be Cinderstone. Rusty leaned forward, his large hands hovering over the nav console. A holomap flickered to life, showing their current trajectory as a clean green line. A tiny, forgotten planetoid spun lazily off their route, marked in red. Cinderstone. The name was apt. It was a cosmic afterthought, a lump of volcanic rock in a sector no one bothered with, known for nothing but dust and gravitational anomalies. It's a distress call, Rusty said, his voice low. It was weak, frayed, like a voice calling from across an ocean. It's a risk, Betsy countered immediately. The sector is unpatrolled. Pirate activity is a statistical probability. The signal is ancient, likely a ghost echo from a derelict ship. Responding will consume 12% of our fuel reserves and add a minimum of 3 days to our delivery schedule. The potential for reward is negligible. He listened to her cold, hard logic. Every word was true. He was a hauler, a glorified space trucker. His job was to get from point A to point B. He wasn't a knight errant. He'd learned the hard way that chivalry was a quick way to a shallow grave. His past was a monument to that very lesson. A broken promise that echoed in the quietest moments. A failure that had set him on this endless, lonely path. Getting involved was a fool's game. But the signal, it pulsed again. Faint. Desperate. He thought of a promise made under a different sky, to a different person, a promise he had failed to keep. He couldn't fix the past. He couldn't undo the choices that had branded his soul, but he could answer a call in the dark. It was the one part of the old code he hadn't managed to jettison. "Plot a course, Betsy," he said, his voice leaving no room for argument. "Rusty, I must advise, plot the damn course." A moment of defiant silence hung in the air, the digital equivalent of a disapproving glare. Then, with a reluctant chime, the green line on the hollow map bent, curving toward the red dot of Cinderstone. The Betsy banked slowly, her engines groaning in protest as she left the safe, predictable shipping lane and veered into the unknown. Hours later, they pierced the planet's thin, rust-colored atmosphere. Cinderstone was even more desolate up close, a world of jagged black mountains, sprawling deserts of gray ash and canyons so deep they seemed to swallow the light. There was no sign of life, no cities, no outposts, nothing. "The signal is originating from the bottom of that canyon," Betsy announced, her voice flat with disapproval. "Navigating the crosswinds will be challenging." "You'll manage," Rusty said, his hands sure on the controls. He guided the old freighter down into the maw of the earth, the rock walls rising up around them like colossal black teeth. The ship shuddered and bucked, but he held her steady, his focus absolute. At the bottom of the canyon, where the shadows were permanent, the signal grew stronger. It led them to a sheer rock face that should have been solid. But as they drew closer, a section of the wall shimmered, the rock dissolving into a curtain of light, an energy field. Behind it lay the entrance to a hangar, sleek and clean, utterly alien to the raw geology around it. He set the Betsy down on the polished metal floor with a heavy clank. The silence that followed was immense. "I am detecting advanced technology, biosignatures, and a contained oxygen-rich atmosphere beyond the inner door," Betsy reported. "My recommendation is to proceed with extreme caution, and a very large gun." "Way ahead of you," Rusty grunted, pulling his heavy plasma revolver from its holster. He checked the charge, the familiar weight of the weapon a comfort in his hand. He strode down the ramp, his heavy boots echoing in the cavernous hangar. The air was cool and still. A second door hissed open before him, revealing not a sterile facility, but a paradise. He stopped dead, his breath catching in his throat. It was a vast biodome, filled with flora that shimmered with soft internal light. Strange, elegant trees reached for a ceiling that mimicked a gentle twilight sky. The air was sweet with the scent of alien blossoms and damp earth. Waterfalls cascaded down moss-covered rocks into serene pools. It was a pocket of impossible life in a world of absolute death, and in the center of the garden, standing beside a crystalline pillar that pulsed with soft blue light, was a woman. She turned as he approached, and the sight of her made the grizzled, world-weary heart in his chest stutter. She was tall and slender, with a grace that seemed as natural as a flowing river. Her skin was the color of a twilight sky, a soft, ethereal lavender, and her large eyes, framed by long, dark lashes, were the color of liquid silver. Pointed ears, elegant and delicate, peeked through a cascade of snow-white hair. She wore simple, flowing white robes, but they did nothing to hide a figure that was undeniably, breathtakingly female. She was the most beautiful creature Rusty had ever seen, in any star system. She looked at him not with fear, but with a profound, ancient sadness, and something else. Recognition. "You came," she said, her voice a melody, soft but clear. "I had almost lost hope." Rusty kept his weapon lowered but ready. "I picked up your signal. Who are you? What is this place?" Her silver eyes held his, and in their depths he saw the weight of a dying star. "This place is a memory, a tomb, and a cradle," she explained, her gaze unwavering. "My name is Lyra Quell, and I am the very last fertile female of my people. The Silvery." Rusty's gaze swept over the impossible garden, his tactical mind assessing, categorizing. The place was beautiful, but it was also a fortress, defensible. The single entrance was a natural choke point, but it was also a trap. He kept his revolver pointed at the floor, a non-threatening but ready posture. His voice was a low rumble, cutting through the serene air. "The last one? That's a heavy burden to carry alone." Lyra Quell gave a sad, slow nod. Her silver eyes drifted towards the crystalline pillar, and its blue light seemed to pulse in time with her sorrow. "Our history is long, marked by art and philosophy. We were not warriors. We saw the galaxy as a place of wonder. That was our mistake. She gestured for him to walk with her, her movements fluid and unhurried as if she had all the time in the universe, even as she spoke of its end. We were targeted by a collector, she continued, her voice laced with a cold anger that seemed at odds with her gentle appearance. A predator named Grak Tusker. He does not conquer worlds for territory or resources. He hunts species to extinction, preserving a single trophy and selling the genetic codex to the highest bidder. He calls himself an artist. Rusty's jaw tightened. He'd heard whispers of scavengers like that in the lawless outer sectors, vultures who picked at the bones of dying civilizations. But a hunter who caused the death? That was a different kind of evil. He did not come with warships, Lyra said, stopping before a pool where luminous fish swam in lazy circles. He came with whispers. He engineered a plague, a tailored virus that attacked the very core of our DNA, rendering us sterile before it killed us. It swept through our worlds like a silent fire. Within a generation, the birth stopped. The nurseries fell silent. My parents, the keepers of our lore, placed me in this sanctuary, a genetic ark they called the Cradle, and sent me into the deep black before they too succumbed. She placed a delicate lavender-hued hand on the crystalline pillar. The blue light intensified and holographic images flickered within its depths. Spiraling strands of DNA, star charts, complex biological diagrams. Everything we were, everything we could be again, is in here. The complete genetic sequence of the Silvery people. I am its guardian, and its only hope. Rusty felt an unwelcome pang of empathy. He was a professional loner, a man who had made a career of not getting involved. But the sheer scale of her loss, the profound solitude she embodied, resonated with a deep, scarred part of his own soul. "I'm sorry for what happened to you," he said, the words feeling inadequate. "But why me? Why send a distress call now?" Lyra turned her full attention back to him, and her silver eyes were piercing, analytical. "This sanctuary has been scanning every ship that has passed through this sector for 50 standard years," she explained. "The plague Tusker created was diabolically clever. It left a dormant flaw in our genome. To restart my species, I cannot simply use the stored genetic material. I need an outside catalyst, a progenitor, a compatible genetic donor whose DNA is strong enough to bypass the virus's latent markers and ensure the viability of the next generation." She took a step closer, and for the first time, Rusty could smell her scent, something like night-blooming jasmine and clean, cold starlight. "We have scanned thousands of beings. Humans, Kalins, Zagok, all were incompatible. Their biology was too divergent, their genetic resilience too low. But you," her eyes raked over him, not with lust, but with the meticulous appraisal of a scientist who had finally found the solution to an impossible equation. "Your profile is perfect. Strength, resilience, a rare combination of genetic markers. You are the one, the only one." The air grew thick. Rusty felt a cold dread creep up his spine, colder than the vacuum of space. He knew what was coming. "I'm asking you, Rusty Vance," she said, her voice dropping to an intense, earnest whisper, "to be the father of my new world, to give my people a future, to be the progenitor of the Silveri." The word, father, hit him like a physical blow. It crashed through his defenses and struck the raw, festering wound of his past. The broken promise. A woman's face flashed in his mind, her eyes full of tears. The ghost of a tiny hand he should have held. The life he had built and then shattered. He ran from that life, from that word. Every single day. He buried it under miles of empty space, drowned it in cheap whiskey and loud music. And now this impossible, beautiful ghost of a woman was offering it back to him, dressed up as a noble quest. He took a step back, shaking his head. The gruff, impenetrable mask of the lone hauler slammed back into place. "No," he said, the word coming out like a piece of rusted metal. "No, you've got the wrong man." Confusion clouded her perfect features. "But you are the only man. Genetically, I don't give a damn about genetics," he snarled, his voice harsher than he intended. "I'm a cargo pilot. I move boxes from one rock to another. I'm not a hero. I'm not a savior. And I sure as hell am not a father." The last word was filled with a self-loathing so profound it was almost a physical taste. "I do not understand," Lyra said, her voice soft but unwavering. "I see the honor in you. It's why you answered my call when all others passed by. It is etched into you as surely as your DNA. What you see is a fool who should have kept flying," he shot back. "My word of advice? Send out that call again. Find some other sucker for the job. I'm leaving. He turned on his heel, his decision made. This was too close. Too dangerous. Not the threat of a predator, but the threat of a hope he couldn't afford to feel. He would get in his ship, fire up the engines, and lose himself in the black until this moment was just another bad memory. As his hand reached for the comlink on his wrist to call Betsy, a klaxon suddenly blared through the sanctuary. The serene twilight of the dome was replaced by a pulsating, urgent red. "What is that?" Rusty yelled over the noise, his revolver snapping back up into a combat stance. Lyra's face had gone pale, her lavender skin turning the color of ash. Her silver eyes were wide with a terror that was chillingly real. The outer perimeter sensors. "A ship has just entered orbit." Betsy's voice crackled to life in his ear, frantic and sharp. "Rusty, you need to get out of there now. Hunter-class vessel, a Vulture Series Marauder just dropped out of slipspace. Heavy energy signatures detected. They're locking weapons on the canyon." Lyra stared at him, her previous composure shattered. All the grief and loss of her people was now dwarfed by a fresh, immediate fear. "It's him," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Grak Tusker. After all these years and he's found me." The choice was no longer theoretical. The evil she had described was no longer a story. It was in orbit above them, a loaded gun pointed at the last hope of an entire civilization. Rusty stood frozen between the ramp to his ship, his escape, his solitude, and the terrified, beautiful woman who represented everything he had ever run from. The code he tried to bury, the honor Lyra saw in him, was at war with the ghost of his failure, and the Vulture was getting ready to fire. There was no time for deliberation. Honor, guilt, instinct, whatever it was, it made the decision for him. The klaxon was a war drum counting down the seconds to annihilation. Rusty grabbed Lyra's arm, his grip firm but not rough. "The pillar, can you take the data core?" She didn't hesitate. Her fear was a tangible thing, but beneath it lay a core of tempered steel. She placed her palm on the crystalline structure, and a section of it slid open with a soft chime. Inside, nestled in a protective field, was a glowing, softball-sized sphere of intricate, pulsing light. The cradle. She scooped it out, cradling it against her chest like the most precious child in the universe. "This way. Move," Rusty roared, already pulling her toward the hangar. They sprinted out of the biodome, the illusion of paradise shattering behind them. The cold, hard metal of the hangar floor felt more real. As they raced up the Betsy's ramp, the entire canyon was illuminated by a blinding flash. A fraction of a second later, the shockwave hit, a deafening boom that shook the ancient rock to its foundations. A lance of pure energy, a warning shot from Tusker's Marauder, had vaporized 100 tons of rock just outside the hangar's force field. "Betsy, get us out of here! Full power to the engines now!" Rusty yelled, shoving Lyra into the co-pilot's seat, a place that had been empty for years. He strapped himself into his own chair, his hands flying across the console with practiced, desperate speed. "I am aware of the tactical situation." The AI's voice was tight with digital stress. "Engine warm-up requires a minimum of 10 seconds. Did you want to perhaps offer our pursuer a cup of tea while we wait?" The ship shuddered as another blast impacted the force field protecting the hangar entrance. The lights in the cockpit flickered violently. Lyra let out a small, stifled cry, her knuckles white as she clutched the glowing cradle. "Hold on," Rusty grunted. The engines screamed to life, a raw, untamed roar that was music to his ears. He bypassed the last of the pre-flight checks and slammed the throttle forward. The Betsy, with the protest of straining metal, lifted off the hangar floor and shot out into the canyon just as the entrance's force field collapsed under a third, direct hit. The flight up the canyon was a brawl against physics. Tusker's ship, the Apex Predator, was above them, firing down into the chasm. Bolts of emerald plasma sizzled past the cockpit, scoring molten gashes into the canyon walls. Rusty threw the old freighter into a series of gut-wrenching maneuvers using the rock formations as cover. He flew with an instinct born from 1,000 close calls, feeling the ship not as a machine, but as an extension of his own body. The Betsy groaned and complained, her frame stressed to the breaking point, but she responded. "He's trying to box us in." Betsy's voice cut through the chaos. "He's targeting the canyon walls ahead to create a rock slide." Rusty saw it. Up ahead, a spire of rock as large as a skyscraper was beginning to fracture under enemy fire. He had seconds to decide. He yanked the stick hard to port, sending them into a narrow, unmapped tributary canyon. It was a stupidly dangerous move. the space barely wider than the Betsy's wingspan. Metal screamed as the ship's port stabilizer scraped against the rock face, showering the cockpit view screen with a spray of sparks. But it worked. They emerged from the other side, bursting out of the canyon and into the thin, rust-colored sky of Cinderstone. Below them, the main canyon collapsed in a thundering avalanche of dust and stone. For a moment, they were clear. "He won't be delayed for long," Rusty said, his knuckles white on the controls as he pushed the ship into a steep, desperate climb toward orbit. "Betsy, give me a damage report. Structural integrity is compromised," the AI said, her voice sounding almost winded. "The port stabilizer is venting plasma. Aft shields are non-functional, and I believe a family of rock mites may have taken up residence in my primary exhaust manifold. Apart from that, everything is optimal." As they broke through the last vestiges of atmosphere, the blackness of space was not a comfort. It was an exposed, open battlefield, and waiting for them was the apex predator. It was a thing of brutalist beauty, all sharp angles and weapon emplacements, shaped like a hawk's head. It was sleek, modern, and twice the size of the Betsy. It began to move, not with speed, but with the arrogant, unhurried confidence of a true hunter. "He's faster and better armed," Rusty stated, the grim reality setting in. "We can't outrun him in open space. There is a dense asteroid field 200,000 kilometers off our current trajectory," Betsy offered. "The tombstones of a shattered moon. Navigation would be treacherous, but it may offer some cover." "It's our only shot," Rusty said, angling the ship towards the coordinates. The next hour was a blur of high G turns and desperate gambles. The cockpit was small, forcing an intimacy on them that was both a comfort and a distraction. Lyra sat beside him, silent and composed, her silver eyes tracking the enemy ship on the tactical display. She wasn't panicking. She was watching, learning. The soft lavender of her skin seemed to glow in the dim light of the console, a stark contrast to the utilitarian gray of the cockpit. She had tucked the cradle into a secure compartment, and now her hands rested in her lap, her posture one of regal stillness. During a brief lull, as they navigated a stretch of empty void, she finally spoke, her voice quiet. "You fight like a man who has had much practice running away." It wasn't an accusation. It was an observation. Rusty's jaw tightened. "I'm a hauler. Running is part of the job description." "No," she said, turning her head to look at him. The silver eyes saw too much. "You fight like a man trying to protect something, even when you claim there's nothing you care to protect." She reached out, her cool, slender fingers gently touching the back of his scarred hand on the throttle. The contact was electric, a jolt of warmth that cut through the cold adrenaline. "Thank you, Rusty Vance." He pulled his hand back as if burned, his gaze fixed on the view screen ahead. "Don't thank me yet," he grumbled, his voice thick. They plunged into the asteroid field. It was a chaotic graveyard. Chunks of ice and rock from the size of a fist to the size of a small moon tumbled silently through the void. The apex predator followed, its powerful searchlights cutting through the darkness, relentless. "He's closing," Betsy warned. "His weapon systems are charging." Rusty's mind raced. They couldn't run, they couldn't hide forever, so they would have to fight. "Betsy, find me the biggest, densest rock in this whole damn field. Something with a high iron content, if you can." Scanning. "There is a large nickel iron body 30 clicks ahead. Its rotation is unstable," the AI replied. "May I ask what foolish, last-ditch, and almost certainly fatal plan you are formulating?" A grim smile touched Rusty's lips. "We're going to play dead." He weaved the Betsy through the debris, the larger asteroid looming in the view screen. He fired a short, controlled burst from his forward cannons, not at Tusker but at a smaller asteroid, shattering it into a cloud of shrapnel. Then, he cut the main engines and diverted the last of his power to the forward deflectors. The Betsy went dark and silent, tumbling forward on its remaining momentum, looking like just another piece of dead, drifting metal. As planned, the cloud of shrapnel peppered their hull, creating a shower of sparks and venting a plume of frozen coolant. To Tusker, it would look like they had blundered into an asteroid and were critically damaged. A rookie mistake. The bait was taken. The apex predator surged forward, eager for the kill. Tusker's voice, oily and triumphant, crackled over the open comm channel. "Nowhere left to run, little freighter. Give me the Silvari specimen and the cradle, and I will grant you a quick end." Rusty watched the predator close the distance on his tactical screen. 10 clicks. 5 clicks. Tusker was getting careless, positioning himself for a final disabling shot. He was maneuvering around the large, rotating iron asteroid, putting it directly between his ship and the Betsy. "Now, Betsy," Rusty whispered. He fired his main cannons. The twin bolts of plasma weren't aimed at Tusker's ship. They were aimed at the massive, spinning asteroid. The superheated energy slammed into the iron-rich rock, melting a section of its surface and creating a powerful, focused magnetic blast. A directed EMP. The effect was instantaneous. The lights on the apex predator flickered and died. Its engines sputtered into silence. Caught in the asteroid's gravitational pull, the state-of-the-art hunter began to drift helplessly, its systems completely fried. Rusty slammed the engines back to life. The Betsy roared, shaking off its possum routine. He swung the freighter around, its cannons now aimed directly at the bridge of the dead marauder. He had a clear shot. He could end Grak Tusker right here, vaporize him and the evil he represented. Lyra watched him, her breath held. She saw the killer in his eyes, the cold, hard man forged in the unforgiving fires of the frontier, but she also saw the flicker of something else. Hesitation. Control. Tusker's ship was a sitting duck. Rusty's finger tightened on the trigger. He thought of the dead worlds Tusker had left in his wake. He thought of the honor Lyra believed he had. With a curse, he powered down the weapons. "Let the void be his judge," he growled, turning the Betsy away from the crippled ship. "Betsy, plot a course. The farthest, most uncharted system you can find." He risked a glance at Lyra. The look in her silver eyes was one of profound understanding, and something more, something that made his guarded heart ache. He had proven her right. He was a man of honor, and for a man running from his past, that was the most dangerous thing he could possibly be. The silence that followed the battle was heavier than the silence of empty space. The roar of engines was now a steady, reassuring hum. The frantic alerts on the consoles had subsided, and the shadow of the apex predator was a fading memory behind them. Grak Tusker was left to the cold justice of the void, a fate Rusty Vance felt was more fitting than a quick, clean death. It was a choice that lingered in the cockpit, an unspoken testament to the man he was, versus the man he pretended to be. They flew for days, the Betsy limping through the black. Rusty worked tirelessly, rerouting power from non-essential systems, patching hull breaches with emergency sealant and coaxing the damaged port stabilizer back to a semblance of functionality. He worked with a focused intensity that left no room for conversation, no space for the complex emotions stirring between him and the alien woman who now shared his solitude. Lyra became a quiet presence in his small universe. She learned the ship's systems with astonishing speed, her keen mind absorbing schematics and power relays as if she were born to it. She brewed a potent, fragrant tea from dried leaves she had brought from her sanctuary, its warmth a small comfort in the recycled air. She never asked about his past, about the source of the profound sadness in his eyes that mirrored her own. She simply watched him, and in her gaze, he felt a sense of being seen that was both terrifying and deeply desired. One cycle, as he was recalibrating the navigation sensors, she approached him with the data core of the cradle in her hands. "The sanctuary's long-range scanners found it years ago," she said, her voice soft. "A ghost in the system logs. A world that fits every parameter required for my people to thrive. It is uncharted, uninhabited, a place where we can begin again. The navigational data is here." Rusty took the core. He interfaced it with the Betsy's main computer. A star chart materialized on the screen, a dizzying array of known systems. Then a single trajectory lit up, leading far off the established maps, into a sector marked only as Unexplored Region 7. At the end of the line, a single verdant star system glowed, Iridian Prime. Lyra whispered the name like a prayer. "It means first dawn in my tongue." "It's a long way from anywhere," Rusty noted, his voice carefully neutral. "No shipping lanes, no outposts. You'd be truly alone." "Alone is safe," she replied, her silver eyes meeting his. "Alone is a chance." He nodded, the unspoken truth hanging between them. He was an expert in being alone. He plotted the course, and the Betsy, ever the faithful wounded beast, turned her nose toward this final unknown frontier. When Iridian Prime finally filled the view screen, it stole their breath. It was a jewel of impossible blues and greens, swirled with clouds of pristine white, a living, breathing world. As they descended through the atmosphere, They saw no signs of civilization, no scars of industry, only vast, ancient forests, soaring mountain ranges capped with snow, and oceans so clear they could see the shadows of massive, gentle creatures moving in their depths. Rusty set the Betsy down in a meadow of soft, glowing moss, nestled by a waterfall that cascaded into a crystal-clear lake. When the ramp lowered, the air that filled the ship was rich and sweet, thick with the scent of alien pollen, damp earth, and pure, unfiltered life. It was the scent of a new beginning. They stepped out together, standing side by side on the threshold of a world untouched by sorrow. For a long moment, they simply stood in silence, bathed in the golden light of the system's sun. Lyra turned to him, her face illuminated, her beauty more striking than ever in this natural paradise. The hope in her eyes was a painful, beautiful thing to behold. "We're here," she said, her voice thick with an emotion that spanned generations of loss and a future of limitless possibility. She stepped closer, placing her hands on his chest. He could feel the warmth of her palms through the worn fabric of his shirt. "You have fulfilled your promise, Rusty Vance. You brought me to safety. You have given my people their future." Her silver eyes searched his, pleading. "But my offer remains. I do not ask it of you as a biological necessity anymore. I ask it as a woman. Stay with me. Don't be the progenitor of my species. Be the father of my children. Build this new world with me." The words were a perfect, shining key, crafted to unlock the one door in his soul he had sealed shut with pain and regret. "Father of my children." He looked at her, at this magnificent, strong, and beautiful woman, and he felt the ice that had encased his heart for years begin to crack. He saw a future he never dared to imagine, a home, a family, waking up to those silver eyes, watching children with lavender skin and stormy gray eyes play in the glowing moss. A life of peace, a life of purpose, a life of love. And that's why he knew he couldn't stay. The ghost of his broken promise rose up, not as a whisper, but as a roar. Men like him, men who lived by the gun, men who carried darkness in their past, were magnets for trouble. Sooner or later his old life would find him. Some old score, some forgotten enemy, some bounty hunter looking to make a name. He was a storm, and to stay here would be to anchor that storm over this perfect, peaceful paradise. He would not taint this new Eden with the sins of his old world. He had saved her from one monster. He would not become another. He reached up and gently took her hands in his. His voice, when he spoke, was a ragged, painful rasp. "Lyra, He looked from her face to the untouched paradise around them. "This world, it's perfect. It's pure. It deserves to stay that way." Understanding dawned in her eyes, followed by a wave of profound sorrow. She didn't argue. She saw the truth in his own haunted gaze. She knew his decision was not a rejection of her, but a final, selfless act of protection. "The promise you broke," she whispered, her voice trembling. "It must have been a terrible one." He couldn't speak. He just gave a single sharp nod, his jaw clenched so tight it ached. The adieu was a silent tragedy. He took her face in his hands, his rough, scarred fingers gentle against her soft skin. He leaned down and pressed his lips to hers. The kiss was not one of passion, but of a deep, heartbreaking farewell. It was the taste of every future they would never have, of a love too powerful to be denied and too tragic to be fulfilled. It was the taste of goodbye. He released her and took a step back, the distance between them feeling like a chasm. He turned without another word and walked back up the ramp of the Betsy, each step heavier than the last. The ramp sealed behind him, shutting out the scent of paradise, severing the connection. From the cockpit, he watched her. Lyra Quell, the last matriarch, stood alone in her new world, a solitary, regal figure against a backdrop of creation. She did not cry. She simply watched him, her hand raised in a silent farewell, the queen of a future he had secured, but could never share. He fired up the engines. The familiar mournful cry of a Terran guitar began to fill the cockpit, the voice of a long-dead bluesman singing about a crossroads. With a heavy heart, Rusty Vance lifted his old, battered ship into the sky. He set a course for the bleak, familiar emptiness of the void. A forager, a hauler, a loner. The last outlaw, once more. True honor isn't just about fighting for a future. It's about having the strength to protect it from yourself. The road is long and lonely, but it's better when we travel together. If this story touched you, subscribe and share it with a friend who appreciates the old code of honor.